They thought they could construct a narrative strong enough to bury you beneath it. What they didn't anticipate was the unraveling. As the veils lift and the lies dissolve, those who orchestrated your defamation now squirm under the weight of their own fabrication. What was whispered in secrecy is now echoed back with clarity, and every hour that passes leaves them more exposed, more embarrassed, more undone. They had no idea who they targeted. Blinded by arrogance, they mistook silence for weakness, mistook alignment for vulnerability. They tampered with perception, adjusting records, scripting versions of you that never existed, reconfiguring stories to suit their aim. They tailored entire narratives around falsehood, believing themselves untouchable. Behind the scenes, their web of distortion spread wide through whispers, altered transcripts, falsified data, desperately trying to sculpt a fall that was never destined. Fear was their motive, but delusion drove their execution. They couldn't stand the frequency you embodied, so they created a replica world where their attacks seemed justified. But fiction, when held to the flame of truth, turns to ash. Their reports break down under simple inquiry. Timelines fracture, claims contradict. Their efforts collapse under the simplest forensic inspection. The very materials they use to accuse you become exhibits in their own undoing. They crafted weapons out of dishonesty, but lacked the skill to wield them. Now those same tools turn on their creators. The backlash is exact, not theatrical, surgical. What once looked like a coordinated takedown now reveals itself as collective self-sabotage. They're left scrambling amid their own ruins, exposed not by your retaliation, but by the precision of natural law correcting itself through the elegance of collapse. They marched in formation, not from unity of vision, but from absence of it. Drawn together by shared ignorance, they reacted, not out of discernment, but out of programming. They moved as instructed, never pausing to verify, never seeking clarity. Assertions were consumed like sacred law, and anything outside that narrative was rejected on reflex. Instead of inquiry, they chose obedience. Their assault was launched against a force far beyond their grasp, one they lacked the sensitivity or scope to recognize, let alone comprehend. Their behavior mirrored the mechanics of a machine, synchronized, automated, devoid of inner reflection. Caught in the illusion of moral superiority, they enacted a campaign choreographed by unseen manipulators who tailored every emotion, every outburst. But illusions can't withstand pressure, and now the mirage begins to collapse. What was once hidden reveals its scaffolding. What they thought was justice shows itself as design. Their alignment with a false cause is now public record in realms far beyond this one. Humiliation doesn't require announcement, it radiates. Those attuned can sense the residue of regret flooding the air around them. The part they played, the lies they echoed, the energy they contributed to a war based on distortion, all of it now sits plainly before them. No curtain remains. The deception they clung to vanishes with alarming speed. Structures once reinforced by shared delusion dissolve at the pace of awakening, leaving only raw exposure behind. Truth doesn't ask for permission, it arrives. And when it does, it makes no effort to soften the blow. The narratives they curated, the facades they maintained, the safety they believed their groupthink provided, all of it disassembles in real time. What they tried to weaponize becomes the evidence of their manipulation. They gathered under a banner stitched with fiction, and now they stand in the ashes of its unraveling, forced to reconcile with the clarity that no longer grants them the luxury of denial. What once served as their echo chamber now becomes a silent audience to their unraveling. Applause fades into uneasy glances as the very stage they stood on begins to crack beneath them. Those who once nodded in agreement now watch from a distance, unwilling to align with a collapsing narrative. Their composure falters in the presence of undeniable illumination. The clarity of reality is too sharp for eyes long adjusted to shadows. The very truth they labored to suppress now floods every concealed space, leaving them exposed, shaken, and visibly destabilized. The body often senses collapse before the mind can register it. The toll is no longer philosophical, it's physiological. Instincts trigger in panic as the false structure crumbles. Breaths grow shallow, muscles tighten. A quiet chaos ripples through their system as the consequences they swore would never arrive begin manifesting in real time. Strategy dissolves into survival mode as unraveling accelerates beyond their capacity to contain. The illusion they clung to as justification can no longer hold shape. Every belief built to rationalize their behavior disintegrates under new information that contradicts their chosen reality. What was once certainty is now confusion. They face themselves without the armor of self-righteous delusion. Identity becomes a question mark. The persona they performed no longer has a stage. And when the mask slips, all that remains is the echo of intention they can't explain away. Former alliances fade, support vanishes, the room empties. The one who orchestrated the smear now faces a narrative that turns in on itself. Their well-crafted personas fracture as the manipulations they so confidently engineered begin to leak from every corner. Lies are no longer secure. Those once charmed or coerced by them start to pull back, sensing decay. Their influence no longer inspires, it repels. Their plans, once sharpened for maximum damage, now appear clumsy and pitiful. In the end, the power they misused becomes the rope unraveling their own construct. What they built on illusion now collapses under the weight of a truth they could never bend. They invested so much in your erasure because your presence made them feel exposed. What they built on illusion could not coexist with something so unfiltered, so rooted in truth. The effort they spent, so calculated, so obsessive, reveals more about their inner fragility than they ever intended to show. Now, stripped of pretense, they appear not just flawed, but foolish. Their grand campaign only highlights the absurdity of its target. The contrast between the force of their attack and the strength of what they attacked has become humiliatingly obvious. Energetic symmetry is now in motion, and it pulls no punches. The distortions they aimed outward return inward, calibrated not for punishment, but for clarity. Each ripple of malice carries coordinates leading back to its origin. The consequences are not abstract, they're immediate. Financial drains they orchestrated for you now spring from their own holdings. Roads they tried to block for others, close beneath their own feet. Even as they scramble to pivot, the velocity of return bypasses their intentions. The imbalance they manufactured begins correcting itself with mathematical resolve. They miscalculated the permanence of what can be erased. Information thought destroyed regenerates. Threads once severed reattach themselves in defiance of their efforts. Records surface in places they failed to sweep. Voices they intimidated find amplification. Networks once complicit pull away. The very levers they once controlled now respond to a higher order, one that cannot be bribed, threatened, or silenced. What was meant to serve as a trap now operates as testimony. They sense it, the tightening loop, the implosion of plans executed with false certainty. Their stage collapses, not through confrontation, but by reversal. What once looked like a guaranteed takedown now spins into a full reckoning. The foundation they stood on reveals itself as borrowed. And now, that ground gives way, piece by piece, under the weight of truth they could never outrun. What they built was never strong, just polished. And now the thin surface they called reputation has shattered beyond mending. The same voices they once weaponized now echo back at them with piercing clarity. The stage they stood on to hurl distortions now hosts the unveiling of their own contradictions. The audience that once applauded now withdraws in disgust. As alignment restores itself across both visible structures and unseen currents, their fall becomes undeniable. Every act once covered by secrecy is now illuminated. Every hidden thread pulled, every false intention exposed. The weight of what they created now presses down without pause, gaining momentum with each passing hour. They cling to their old playbook, desperate for a formula that no longer functions. Gaslighting, diversion, false innocence. But none of it holds in the presence of sustained truth. Every attempt to pivot lands flat. The same tactics that once manipulated perception now highlight their desperation. Their outer calm dissolves at the edges. Internally, the panic is spreading, too fast to contain. Even night refuses them refuge. When silence descends, the echoes grow louder. They're visited not by rest, but by symbols of their own unraveling. The mind loops through unfinished stories and collapsing schemes. Each failed cover-up replays in sequence. Their body senses what their mouth won't admit. The ending they feared is now arriving. Excuses no longer carry weight. Explanations ring hollow. The allies they once relied on retreat, each distancing themselves from what they now recognize as unsustainable. The solitude they tried to trap you in has inverted itself. Isolation now surrounds them, not as punishment, but as mirror. And in that stillness, they realize the energy they directed had no access to your field. Their efforts, loud, forceful, costly, never touched the essence they were aiming to corrupt. Their failure is total, their reckoning personal, and your path untouched, ascendant, unbothered. What they launched in your direction, layered, venomous, relentless, never reached its intended mark. Their efforts, though loud and persistent, dissolved in the presence of your alignment. Not a single strike dimmed your field. The crowd they once swayed now shifts back toward clarity, their temporary confusion giving way to recognition. What was spent in trying to collapse you yielded nothing but debt. And the greater field, it remembers everything. Balance will always return. Energetic law does not negotiate. It tallies with cold precision. Their sidesteps, evasions, and diversions only add pages to their own record. They move in loops, not realizing that each attempt to deflect consequence builds a sharper reflection. What they hope to delay now gains speed. Their panic becomes theater, their avoidance a spotlight. The thread running through their entire campaign was never strategy. It was avoidance of self. That core remains unchanged. The same refusal to own their actions now drives them toward shallow repentance. The cycle offers countless openings for self-confrontation, but each one refused leads only to amplification. And when they re-emerge, because they will, it won't be with truth. It will be with choreography, expression scripted to mirror regret, but hollow on contact. What appears as apology is merely a calculated pause between manipulations. Tokens will arrive, wrapped in timing too perfect to be coincidence. Their offerings are placed like distractions, hoping you mistake polish for depth. Their sentences stretch toward the future, never the past. They sell reformation as a product, while their core intention remains untouched. Surface changes serve only as camouflage for motives they refuse to transform. And beneath it all, the same pattern repeats, dressed in new vocabulary, but unchanged in essence. They'll return, wearing new faces, but the frequency is unmistakable. Though the script may be revised, the driver remains intact, control wrapped in adoration. This time, it begins with excessive praise masked as appreciation, an emotional saturation meant to fog your clarity. Suddenly, your uniqueness becomes their obsession. The flood of affirmation isn't love, it's leverage. The goal isn't connection, but access. Every flattering phrase is a carefully measured distraction designed to soften your internal guards. Their requests for forgiveness aren't rooted in understanding, they're escape routes. The apologies carry no weight of truth, only the panic of exposure. Behind every performance of sorrow lives the same fear, consequence. Their regret is strategic, not spiritual. Their emotion, a tool, not a reflection. They want your acceptance to buffer their discomfort, not to acknowledge harm done. They seek entry without atonement, closeness without correction, and mercy without realignment. Be warned. What once orchestrated deception now crafts a new narrative, this time with trembling voices and moist eyes instead of falsified stories and alliances. The manipulation remains, only the costume changes. What used to be aggression is now cloaked in affection. What once attacked your name now compliments your spirit. But the mind behind it remains unchanged, adapting its tactics to suit the temperature. Gifts arrive, promises are made, timing feels fated. And yet beneath it all, the same fracture in their integrity vibrates through every gesture. What they hope you won't notice is that remorse has no root, only decoration. Their appeal is not a reflection of inner shift, but of desperation, masked as devotion. The boldness of their approach borders on delusion. After everything they engineered, they truly believe a few poetic lines and softened tones will override your evolved perception. But they've miscalculated again, because you no longer see with hope, you see with proof. The fact that they still believe old tactics could sway you reveals how deeply they've misread the magnitude of your transformation. While their reality fractures under the weight of the very energy they invoked, your path widens and flourishes without resistance. Every barrier they plotted, through lies, interference, or projection, fails to take root. The currents they tried to reroute redirect themselves straight into your flow, delivering increase instead of delay. The doors they tried to close simply multiplied into new ones. What they intended to sabotage only served to accelerate what was already destined. Every distortion hurled your way functioned as spiritual fuel. Where they hoped to weaken, they ended up reinforcing. Attacks that were meant to fracture you pushed your inner alignment to a new octave. Triggers they weaponized became tools of transformation. The force of their aggression applied pressure, but the outcome was refinement, not collapse. What shields you is not reactive. It is encoded, pre-programmed for precision. Forces that stand between you and harm respond not to emotion, but to resonance. Their schemes can't register on the level where your protection functions. Attempts to breach your field are met with elegant neutralization. Systems in place for your safety operate quietly, invisibly, but with a level of precision beyond anything they can detect. Your expansion is self-activating. Every shift in frequency intensifies your clarity, deepens your vision, and strengthens your sovereignty. The essence within you continues to unfold in waves, unaffected by interference. Every attempt to mute your light now amplifies its reach. Every scheme meant to silence you upgrades your signal. What they see as failure is actually calibration. What they experience as chaos is simply your emergence in motion, uninterrupted, uncontested, undeniable. The elevation you've reached is no longer a theory. It's a visible, undeniable shift that no amount of opposition could halt. You move in realms they cannot comprehend, guided by layers of insight beyond their limited reach. While your expansion becomes increasingly effortless, their unraveling accelerates in equal measure. Their descent is not a punishment. It's the natural consequence of choosing density over evolution. The split in timelines is no longer subtle. What was once unseen now plays out in full clarity. Their efforts, vast and exhausting, now serve as monuments to their own misunderstanding. Every strategy crafted to limit you only emphasized your resilience. Every attempt to suppress only amplified your reach. What they funneled into collapse instead birthed acceleration. And now, the irony sharpens. They poured their energy into extinguishing something they never truly understood, only to become witnesses to its full ignition. What they once rallied begins to shift. Those convinced by illusion now question everything. The alliances they built through manipulation fracture under scrutiny. The same crowd that once echoed their narrative now demands answers. The chorus they once directed now sings a different tune, and it's one of accountability. The shift is collective, the reaction undeniable. People begin to piece it together. How influence was misused, how facts were bent, how intention was cloaked. The dissonance grows until it breaks, and when it does, what follows is a wave of clarity too strong to resist. Former accusers become defenders. Former spectators step forward. The momentum reverses, and those who spread distortion now find themselves isolated by the very mechanisms they once controlled. There's no need for revenge, because the truth, now moving without resistance, becomes its own reward. The community they used as a weapon becomes the mirror that reflects back their true face. And those who stood against you, many now stand corrected, not by your demand, but by their own awakened conscience. Your consistency has become the beacon through which clarity now spreads. What once lived in whispers has erupted into shared knowing. Through every connection, spoken or silent, the truth of your essence reaches minds previously clouded by influence. Masks drop not with force, but with the weight of comparison. Your unwavering integrity now reveals, by contrast, the erratic shifts of those who falsely claimed spiritual grounding. The difference is too stark to ignore. What they hid behind for so long has been shredded by their own actions. Supporters, once entranced, break free, not from bitterness, but from the sting of having been used. What began as a campaign against you now exposes a pattern larger than one target. The tactics that framed you now appear in other contexts, repeated with startling familiarity. The once loyal realize they weren't just misled, they were instrumentalized. And that realization, more than anger, is what dismantles allegiance. Those who once turned away from you now turn toward you, not in apology, but in truth, recognition. Their shift doesn't require your approval. It simply aligns with reality's movement. You don't need to celebrate their unraveling, because what's unfolding is greater than personal recompense. It's architecture realigning. The deceivers now face a silence that mirrors the silence they hoped would consume you. And while their social scaffolding collapses, so too do the roles they wrapped themselves in. The cosmic structure they exploited for credibility no longer permits their participation. Every attempt to cling to borrowed light now ends in feedback loops of disconnection. All at once, awareness clicks into place. What once seemed convincing now seems absurd. The complexity they cloaked themselves in begins to look like performance. Even the casually observant begin to see through the layers. Where once they carried influence, they now carry embarrassment. What they used as spiritual currency evaporates. The connection they boasted of severs mid-sentence. Messages go silent. Energetic support withdraws. Their claimed guidance no longer stands by them. The councils they referenced, the ancestors they invoked, the higher realms they quoted, all gone. Not in punishment, but in return to natural order. And as they fall into spiritual exile, the mirror they built for you reflects their own disintegration. Identity collapses without substance. Belief shatters under contradiction. And the silence they tried to impose upon you becomes their own echo chamber. What once seemed unwavering within them now cracks under invisible weight. The certainty they projected collapses into internal chaos. The same forces they invoked as allies now speak through events rather than words, revealing, without ambiguity, where alignment truly resides. The energy they once used as fuel for sabotage now disperses, unreachable, redirected by higher intelligence toward cleansing and redistribution. Their momentum evaporates. The pulse behind their efforts fades. Inspiration dries up. Channels of manifestation they once tapped into go silent. The force they distorted now withdraws completely, unavailable until balance is restored. What they tried to generate in your field, emptiness, stagnation, spiritual inertia, now surrounds them with perfect energetic mirroring. Their decline is not cruelty, it is recalibration. There is no tragedy in this from a cosmic vantage point, only the raw conditions required for authentic transformation. The collapse they experience removes what can no longer continue. Their fatigue, their disconnection, their inability to create, these symptoms are not punishments, they are invitations. Without this rupture, no lasting rebuilding could ever begin. What feels like spiritual death is in fact a clearing. It's a return to the blank page. But to write anything true this time, they must confront what they avoided: responsibility, remorse, and release. The void they now inhabit, while terrifying to the ego, is sacred in its opportunity. It asks nothing but truth. It offers nothing but the raw materials of rebirth. And from a soul perspective, this may be their most vital moment, the point where everything artificial dissolves and only what's real remains. Whether they choose to face it or flee once more will determine whether this fall becomes their foundation or their exile. Your unwavering clarity has done what no resistance ever could: exposed illusion through contrast alone. Every attempt to distort your image collapsed, not because you retaliated, but because your alignment never fractured. While they spiraled deeper into roles built on control and illusion, your rooted presence stood unchanged. No matter how elaborate their theater became, the power guarding your essence never dimmed, never faltered, never questioned your right to rise. What was permitted to reach you did so only to sculpt strength. What was blocked never had access to begin with. The most corrosive intentions disintegrated before making contact, intercepted by intelligence far beyond physical perception. Their greatest efforts yielded nothing but momentum for your evolution. Their sabotage disguised itself as delay, but served as refinement. The more force they exerted, the brighter you became. Their grasp on others loosened as your light clarified the air around you. As they contracted under the pressure of their own dishonesty, your influence expanded without force. The duality between what is real and what is manufactured could no longer be blurred. Integrity began speaking louder than spectacle. Their narrative lost power under its own weight. Each time they repeated the lie, it wore thinner. Each time they orchestrated a new tactic, it required more effort to conceal. Your silence grew louder than their noise. Their insistence revealed their insecurity, their collapse inevitable. No obstacle they positioned ever anchored. What they called sabotage became stepping stones. What they labeled destruction became activation points. Even their most persistent interference aligned, without their consent, to serve your timeline. That is the elegance of natural order. It cannot be manipulated without cost. You didn't win by domination. You rose by remaining unchanged. While they layered fiction upon fiction, you lived your truth in plain view. Now, the aftermath writes itself. The outcome is not revenge, it is design. The echoes of their choices surround them now, not as punishment, but as consequence made visible. Let it be remembered. The attack said nothing about who you were. It revealed exactly who they are. Their shame deepens not because of what you exposed, but because of what they can no longer hide. And all the while, your signal intensifies. Your clarity sharpens.